It was a warm Saturday afternoon in downtown Los Angeles, the kind of day when the city shimmered with wealth and attitude. A sleek red Lamborghini screeched to a stop outside an upscale cafe. From it emerged Brandon Carrington, a man in his early 40s, sharp suit, expensive sunglasses, and a smirk made of entitlement. Just as Brandon approached the cafe, an old rusty navy blue Toyota Corolla parked nearby, engine wheezing. Out stepped Elijah Thomas, a calm black man in his 50s, wearing a plain white tee, dusty jeans, and a quiet dignity. Brandon burst into laughter loud enough to silence a group of brunchgoers. "You seriously drove that pile of scrap here?" Brandon said, waving at Elijah's car. "Did it roll downhill to get here, or did you have to beg it?" Laughter erupted around him. Elijah simply smiled and said, "It gets me where I need to go." Brandon scoffed. "Yeah, the junkyard, maybe." The mood turned cruel. But Elijah's eyes held something deeper, something no one noticed yet. Inside the cafe, Elijah took a quiet seat near the window, the sunlight warming the worn surface of his table. He ordered a simple black coffee, speaking with gentle clarity to the young server. Outside, Brandon strutted past the glass, still laughing to himself. People turned to stare, not at Brandon's car, but at Elijah's poise. The waitress returned, whispering, "I'm sorry about what happened outside." Elijah smiled and said, "You don't have to be. I've heard worse from people who owned less." His words carried weight, unspoken stories lining every syllable. In that moment, the atmosphere shifted, from mockery to silent admiration. Even the server looked at him differently, as though sensing something regal behind his simplicity. Elijah sipped his coffee, savoring not just the warmth of the drink, but the power of not having to prove anything to anyone. Brandon returned to his Lamborghini, leaned against the hood, and started recording a video on his phone. "This right here," he said, gesturing to Elijah's Corolla, "is why you hustle, so you don't end up driving trash like this." His followers poured in with laughing emojis and fire reactions. But in his effort to go viral, Brandon hadn't noticed the reflection of Elijah in the cafe window, calm, watching. Brandon shouted louder, now talking about generational failure and people who don't try hard enough. It was cruel, targeted, and loud enough for Elijah to hear every word. Still, Elijah didn't flinch. A man who had weathered far more than insults from small men with big toys. While Brandon sought validation through mockery, Elijah sat still, his peace unshaken. The storm outside only highlighted the calm within. Finishing his coffee, Elijah rose slowly, tipping the waitress with a folded 20 and a warm smile. He walked out, his old boots quiet on the tile floor. As he reached the sidewalk, Brandon was still mid-rant, unaware of what Elijah represented. Without a word, Elijah unlocked his Corolla, got in, and drove away. The engine sputtered but moved forward, as always. A few people on the patio stopped laughing. One man took out his phone and began to search Elijah's name. Something about him lingered. As Elijah turned the corner and disappeared, the narrative shifted. Brandon had insulted a man, but maybe, just maybe, he'd underestimated who he was. The first seed of doubt was planted. Brandon eventually stopped recording, looking around, expecting applause. But the laughter had faded. A woman leaned over to her friend and whispered, "Who was that man?" Another replied, "I don't know, but he had something about him." The street noise resumed, but something had changed. Brandon's eyes darted across the cafe's window, catching his own reflection. Smug, shallow, alone. Meanwhile, Elijah was already miles away, driving down the freeway in his old Corolla with the radio humming softly. His face was calm, eyes focused. That moment wasn't about proving Brandon wrong. It was about never letting the world drag you into its noise. The quiet dignity of his exit echoed louder than Brandon's mockery ever could. Elijah was born in a sun-beaten town in rural Georgia, where dirt roads stretched like forgotten promises and opportunity felt like a rumor. His father worked 2 jobs, mechanic by day, janitor by night, and his mother cleaned homes for people who barely looked her in the eye. Elijah, a boy with wide eyes and calloused hands, grew up beneath the hum of diesel engines and the clang of broken metal. While other kids played ball, he watched his father rebuild transmissions with bare fingers and quiet fury. "Machines don't lie," his father once told him. "People will." That stuck with Elijah. It wasn't just about cars. It was about truth. About being something that couldn't be denied. He learned young that the world wasn't made for boys like him, but it didn't matter. He'd make his own world, bolt by bolt. At 15, Elijah built his first engine from junkyard scraps. He'd visit the local salvage yard after school, trading sweat for spare parts. The old man who ran the yard, Mr. Halverson, gave him access to the back corner, the bone pile, he called it. There, amid rust and ruin, Elijah found peace. His hands worked with reverence, like he was rebuilding more than machinery. It wasn't just about mechanics, it was purpose. One summer night, with lightning cracking the southern sky, the engine roared to life on a makeshift frame. Neighbors peeked out windows. Elijah stood soaked in sweat and rain, eyes burning with pride. For the first time, something that came from his mind, his hands had moved the world. It was small. Yeah, it was loud. And it was his. After high school, Elijah worked at a highway repair depot by day and studied auto engineering at night. The classrooms were cold and unwelcoming. He was often the only black student, and professors spoke over him or not at all. His co-workers mocked his night classes, calling him Professor Junkyard. But Elijah never snapped. He absorbed every insult like heat into metal, pressure he'd used to forge his ambition. One winter night, after a brutal shift laying asphalt, Elijah sat in the break room, fingers blistered, eyes bloodshot, poring over blueprints by the vending machine's flickering light. A coworker leaned over and sneered, "That paper ain't gonna build you no engine." Elijah didn't even look up. He just said, "Watch me." And he kept drawing. In his late 20s, Elijah finally pitched a prototype to a local investor. He wore his best shirt, one of only 2 collared ones he owned, and carried his dream in a suitcase built from his mother's old sewing box. But the investor, a smirking man with polished shoes and zero vision, barely let him finish. "You're smart, kid, real scrappy," he said, "but no one's going to buy a car built by a guy who looks like you." That night, Elijah sat in his shed, alone with the prototype. Rain leaked from the roof and onto his design papers. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just stared. Until finally, he whispered, "Then I'll build it myself, and they'll have to buy it." That was the moment everything changed. The fire wasn't new. It just burned brighter. In the deepest part of that night, Elijah stood outside his shed, staring into the stars like they owed him something. "You're gonna break," he whispered to himself. "You're gonna fail, but you're not gonna quit." He buried his hands in his jacket, breath curling in the cold air. From across the street, an old woman who'd watched him grow up stepped out onto her porch. "You keep chasing that dream, Eli," she called, her voice cracked but strong. "You catch it, you don't let go." Elijah nodded. No theatrics. No tearful pledges. Just a quiet agreement with the universe. He would rise, no matter what. He turned back toward the shed, a man carrying 1,000 rejections, and one unshakable belief. The belief that something built from nothing still had value. That he still had value. With blueprints refined and a prototype nearly road-ready, Elijah pitched to a second investor group, white-collar executives in tailored suits, seated around a glass table that gleamed like ice. He walked them through the specs, the cost efficiency, the innovation. They nodded politely, until one interrupted. "It's ambitious," the man said, eyes narrowing. "But who's backing you? What pedigree do you have?" Elijah replied, "I built this from the ground up, no pedigree, just proof." Another smirked. "We fund brands, not experiments from people with no market trust." The room fell silent. Elijah knew what they meant. They didn't see a genius. They saw a mechanic who didn't belong. As he walked out, a woman from the team whispered, "You're good, Elijah, but not good enough for them." His silence in reply said it all. "I don't need their table. I'll build my own." Elijah had one ally, Marcus Gray, a retired engineer who once worked for Ford. Marcus saw Elijah's fire early on and mentored him in design and regulation. But when funding got tight, Marcus made a secret deal with a competitor. One night, Elijah arrived at the garage and found it stripped. Hard drives gone, engine parts missing. Marcus was waiting. "They offered me a seat at the table," he said, guilt heavy in his voice. "I thought if I brought them your designs I could get us both in." Elijah's voice was calm but broken. "You didn't believe in me. You believed in them." Marcus looked away, ashamed. Elijah didn't yell. He just walked out into the night, again left with nothing but his mind, his hands, and betrayal gnawing at his ribs like cold steel. The next week, Elijah's bank account was frozen. Legal letters followed, patent disputes filed by the competitor Marcus had joined. News articles ran headlines. Inventors were called into question. His prototype was impounded. Years of labor vanished into litigation. The media never mentioned his name, just the name of the new white-led firm claiming innovation. Elijah stood outside the courthouse in the rain, holding a folder with his original patents. Reporters walked past him. No cameras, no microphones, just silence. Injustice didn't shout, it eroded. It bled. But Elijah didn't crumble. He looked up at the building and said, "They think they buried me. They didn't know I was a seed." And he walked away, drenched, empty-handed, but unbroken. Back at his tiny apartment, surrounded by unopened bills and silence, Elijah stared at the broken frame of what was once his dream. For the first time in years, he considered quitting. He pulled a photo from a box. His father, grease-streaked, smiling under a car hood. A note was scribbled on the back: "If it breaks, fix it. If they doubt you, prove them wrong." Elijah sat there, the words heavy in his chest. Every failure clawed at him. Every betrayal screamed, "You're done." But his father's voice whispered louder. And so he stood, picked up a wrench, walked back to the prototype. No investors. No validation. Just him. And that would be enough. Because belief, true belief, doesn't need applause. Weeks later, Elijah posted a short video online. No branding. No voiceover. Just a silent clip of his prototype roaring to life in a dim garage, the engine humming with power and defiance. The internet noticed. Comments poured in. "Who built this? This is genius. This looks like next-gen design." One comment stood out. "Interested in licensing? Message me." He clicked the profile. It was a tech CEO with millions of followers. Elijah didn't get excited, yet. But that night, for the first time in months, he slept without dreams of collapse. Just possibility. The world had tried to drown his voice. But now, it was listening. Weeks after the video went viral, Elijah received an email. No subject. No signature. Just coordinates. Suspicious but curious, he followed the map to a private airfield. A sleek black SUV waited. The driver, a young woman in all black, simply said, "They want to meet you." Elijah boarded a jet, alone, engines roaring like a new beginning. At a glass-walled office in Tokyo, he was greeted by a group of Japanese engineers and a translator. "We've studied your prototype," one said. "We'd like to license your engine tech for electric performance vehicles." Elijah sat, stunned. No judgment. No backhanded praise. Just respect. "Fine? You would retain majority ownership," the translator added. Elijah finally asked, "Why me?" The engineer replied, "Because your machine moved like it had soul." The world hadn't just noticed. It had come knocking. No. Back home, Elijah moved into a new warehouse. The walls bare, the roof leaking in one corner. But this time, it was his. With funds from the licensing deal, he quietly hired engineers from communities like his. Overlooked, underestimated, but brilliant. He named the company Revel Motors, a tribute to his mother's maiden name and the idea of revolution through movement. In secret, the first true prototype was built, sleek, efficient, entirely original. Elijah didn't do press. No media rollouts. Just product. His philosophy was simple. Let the machine speak. And it did. Within months, foreign auto blogs called it a whispering beast, elegant, silent, and fast. Without fanfare, Revel Motors was beginning to change the industry, and no one knew who was behind it. Yet, legacy car companies began noticing strange trends. Parts suppliers shifted their priorities. Test drivers whispered about an independent firm, outperforming them in early track tests. One executive slammed a magazine on his desk, Revel's Silent Storm, the future of speed. Another scoffed, no press, no pedigree, it's vaporware. But engineers disagreed. Their torque curve beats ours. We ran diagnostics. They're years ahead. In boardrooms from Detroit to Munich, panic simmered. Investors pulled out of older firms. The name Revel spread like wildfire in back channels, forums, and encrypted car dev networks. No one knew the founder. Only that his machines moved like music and left no carbon behind. Elijah was no longer chasing the industry. He was outrunning it quietly. Even as his company grew, Elijah never stepped in front of the camera. He let the machine speak, never the man. Until one day, a journalist tracked him down, not at an office, but outside a youth center where he mentored kids in his old neighborhood. She approached, hesitant. "You're the founder of Revel Motors, aren't you?" Elijah paused. "What makes you think that?" "Because you move like a man who doesn't need to prove anything anymore," she said. He smiled, said nothing, and walked away. The story ran the next day. A soft expose with no photo, just a quote. "The future of cars is being built in silence, and that silence has a name. Elijah Thomas." The world finally heard what he never had to say, out loud. Meanwhile, Brandon Carrington posted a new video. In it he reviewed the latest luxury vehicle, a prototype from a mysterious rising brand. "This right here," he said, hands stroking the matte black hood. "Revel Motors is gonna destroy Tesla and Lambo in one go. This car? It's art." He didn't know, didn't recognize the engineering style or the emotional balance under the hood. He just praised the very brilliance he once mocked. "Whoever built this," Brandon continued, "they're a damn genius." The comments roasted him. "Didn't you clown a guy for driving a Corolla?" But Brandon ignored it, still obsessed with the machine he now worshipped. He didn't know the truth. Not yet. But he was driving straight toward it. Brandon's Lamborghini purred down the coast highway until, with a loud sputter, the engine coughed and died. "You've got to be kidding me," he growled, pulling over. He popped the hood, but stared blankly at the machinery. Streams of smoke hissed upward. His phone had no signal. Drenched in irritation and ego, he flagged cars down, but no one stopped. Then slowly, a navy blue Toyota Corolla pulled onto the shoulder. That same one. Elijah stepped out calmly, the setting sun casting gold behind him. Brandon squinted. "You again?" he muttered. Elijah said nothing. He simply walked past, lifted the hood, and examined the engine. "You overheated it," Elijah said. "Too much revving, not enough respect." Brandon scoffed. "Can you fix it?" Elijah looked up. "I could. But should I?" Brandon paused. For once, unsure. Elijah stepped back, dusting off his hands. Brandon crossed his arms, impatient. "You some kind of mechanic?" Elijah tilted his head. "You could say that." Brandon chuckled sarcastically. "Still driving that same junker?" Elijah replied, "Some things are worth keeping. Not because they're fast, but because they got you through hell." Brandon rolled his eyes. "Well, I've moved on. I drive performance now. Revel Motors is the future." Elijah smiled faintly. "You like their work?" Brandon grinned. "I'd kill to meet whoever built that masterpiece." Elijah stepped forward, looked him dead in the eyes. "You already have." For a moment, Brandon's mind stalled like his engine. His eyes widened. His face drained. "Wait, that's you?" Elijah nodded once, slowly. The silence that followed was heavier than the smoke still rising from Brandon's hood. Brandon took a step back, his voice faltering. You're the founder of Revel Motors." Elijah nodded again. Brandon looked down, then back up. "You drive that? Why?" Elijah ran his hand over the dusty hood of his Corolla. "Because I remember where I started. This car reminds me not to become like the people who laughed at me when I had nothing." Brandon's face twisted. "I didn't know who you were," Elijah said softly, "but you knew who you were. That was enough." The highway wind picked up, ruffling their shirts. Brandon opened his mouth to apologize, but stopped. The words stuck. Elijah didn't need an apology. He had already won. Not by rising above Brandon, but by rising without him. Desperate to salvage pride, Brandon tried a new angle. "Look, if you ever need investors, someone with influence, I've got reach." Elijah gave a quiet laugh, not mocking, just tired. "I spent years looking for people like you, people with reach. And when I stopped looking, I built my own ladder." Brandon looked away, his voice softer. "You're really not going to fix it?" Elijah looked under the hood one more time, then closed it with a soft thud. "You'll figure it out, or maybe you'll finally have to call someone who's been ignored like I was. Either way, you'll learn." He turned, walked back to his car, and got in. No revenge. No gloating. Just peace. The kind that comes when the fight is already won. Elijah drove off slowly, the Corolla rumbling faithfully beneath him. In the rearview mirror, Brandon shrank into the distance, a man left behind not by technology, but by character. Elijah's phone buzzed, a message from his board, "Factory expansion approved." He smiled slightly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the camera lingered on the old car winding down the highway. It didn't matter what he drove. The road belonged to him now. Not just the highway, but the industry. The narrative. The future. The boy from the boneyard had become the man who built engines that whispered change. And while others raced for attention, Elijah had already arrived. Quietly. Unapologetically. Completely. By morning, someone had filmed the roadside exchange. The video went viral. Man insults stranger. Later learns he built the car he worships. Comments exploded. "That's Elijah Thomas. Bro made an empire in silence." Brandon's name trended, for all the wrong reasons. News anchors dissected the irony. Bloggers praised Elijah's restraint. Brands rushed to claim connection to Revel Motors. But Elijah didn't post, didn't comment. He remained silent. Because he knew who he was before anyone else did. While the world talked, he built. While Brandon panicked, Elijah expanded. And in the silence between headlines, something beautiful unfolded. People from overlooked communities began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world could be rebuilt. By them. For them. Elijah stood before his team, engineers, fabricators, designers, most from backgrounds like his, none from privilege. He said, "We're not just building machines. We're building proof. Proof that brilliance exists where no one looks." Applause erupted. But Elijah raised a hand. "When they don't believe in you, believe harder. When they don't see you, build something they can't ignore." His team wasn't just working, they were awakening. In every screw tightened, every design tweaked, there was rebellion. A quiet uprising fueled, not by rage, but by creation. And that was a power no industry could contain. Because Elijah wasn't just changing cars, he was changing who got to change the world. Revel Motors opened a new facility, built not in Silicon Valley, but in Elijah's old town. The same dirt roads now led to a campus where innovation bloomed. He hired formerly incarcerated individuals, high school dropouts, single parents, people the system had discarded. Elijah shook every hand on orientation day. No suits required, just fire. Ain approached him, trembling. "I watched your story, and I want to learn." Elijah placed a hand on his shoulder. Then we'll teach you, not just engines, but how to stand when the world tries to sit you down." Inside those walls, metal turned to movement, and lives turned to legacy. It wasn't charity. It was justice. Long overdue. Later that year, Elijah returned to the community center. No press. No cameras. Just him and the kids he still mentored. He handed out toolkits, gave mini-lectures, and sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, teaching basic circuitry. One kid asked, "You rich now?" Elijah smiled. Rich in the right things. He didn't flash wealth. He wore the same old watch, the same scuffed boots. His success wasn't decoration, it was direction. He poured back into the place that once fed him scraps of hope, because he knew that somewhere in that room was another child like him. Someone no one believed in yet. And maybe, just maybe, this time they wouldn't have to fight so hard to be seen. A new wing opened at the National Innovation Museum, the Hall of Quiet Giants. At the center stood one display, Elijah's original Corolla, paint faded, bumper dented, resting beside a plaque. From this, a billion-dollar empire was born. People stared, stunned. Some cried. It wasn't the car, it was the contrast. The truth that greatness doesn't need approval to exist. Elijah didn't attend the ceremony. He was in the factory, building, mentoring, refining. But his name was etched in metal, surrounded by stories of those who rose without applause. A symbol not of flash, but of fire. Not of wealth, but of will. And outside in the parking lot, kids posed beside the Corolla, their faces lit not by headlights, but by dreams. Months later, Revel Motors unveiled its next-generation vehicle. No stadium, no hype men, no pyrotechnics. Just a quiet live stream, filmed in Elijah's hometown garage. The camera rolled as Elijah, wearing jeans and a simple black tee, stood beside the new car. "We call this the origin," he said, "because you should never forget where you started." No dramatic voiceovers. No celebrity endorsements. Just story and soul. The car was sleek, yes, but the moment wasn't about power or speed. It was about memory. The audience, watching around the world, didn't cheer. They listened. And when it ended, there was silence, then an eruption of praise that felt different. Earned. Elijah didn't just build a car. He built a moment. One that said, "Your beginning doesn't define your end. Your will does." Later that evening, Elijah returned to the very shed where it all began. The leaky roof was patched. The walls had fresh paint. But the energy remained, sacred, still. He ran his hand over an old workbench stained with grease and failure. In a corner sat the very first engine block he ever assembled, now framed in a glass case. He didn't need trophies. This was his. As he stood in silence, a breeze rustled a yellowed paper taped to the wall. A note from his father. "People lie. Machines don't." Elijah smiled faintly. It wasn't about engines anymore. It was about truth. He turned off the light and locked the door, not out of closure, but out of honor. The shed wasn't a relic. It was the foundation of a movement. The next morning, Elijah drove to a hilltop above the city. Beside him, in a private truck bed, sat two vehicles, the old Navy Corolla and the prototype of the Origin. He parked them side by side, stepped out, and watched as the sun broke the horizon. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. One car forged in struggle, the other born from mastery. A young girl, maybe 10, walked by with her father and stopped. "Why do you still keep the old one?" she asked. Elijah knelt beside her. "Because it got me through the fire." She stared, wide-eyed. "Will I get one like that?" Elijah smiled. "You'll build something even better." She nodded, as if permission had been granted. In that moment, legacy wasn't what he left behind. It was what he passed forward. Elsewhere, Brandon Carrington scrolled through the morning news on his tablet. There, on the front page, was the photo of Elijah standing between the two cars. Atidawal. Brandon leaned back in his chair, the headline burning into him. The man who drove through doubt. For a long time he said nothing. Then he stood, walked to the window of his high-rise condo, and stared out at the skyline, not as a man on top, but as one left behind. He wasn't angry. He was hollow. For the first time, he realized that everything he built was meant to be seen. Elijah built things that were meant to last. No apology came. No redemption arc followed. Just a man in a tower looking down, and finally understanding the weight of what he never earned. As the day ended, Elijah returned to the warehouse. He parked the Origin beside his Corolla, engine off, silence thick. He stepped out, walked a few paces, then turned around. The two cars sat side by side, not in competition but in harmony. One born from struggle. One born from success. Both equally vital. A mechanic's hands. A visionary's mind. A survivor's soul. Elijah whispered to himself, "Never forget your engine. That's what drives you." And with that, he stepped back, the warehouse doors closing slowly behind him. Fade to black. Just before total silence, the sound of an engine revs, gentle, clean, and steady. Not a roar. The sound of legacy in motion.